'Tis the season of acquisitions, ladies and gentlemen. Tons of those have been happening, some major ones, and yet another one has happened recently, courtesy of Square Enix, who have sold off a number of major studios and IPs to Embracer Group, who tweeted this just yesterday on May 1st, 2022. The tweet reads, "Today we have entered into an agreement to welcome over 1,000 new colleagues through the acquisition of Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, and Square Enix Montreal, with a fantastic catalog of IPs such as Tomb Raider and Deus Ex to be part of our ecosystem. All of these studios once belonged to Square Enix and have been sold off to Embracer Group." Here is Embracer Group's statement on the matter. The headline reiterates the studios they have acquired, and then scrolling down here, they also emphasize that they've acquired a catalog of IPs including Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, Thief, Legacy of Kain, that's a big one for me, and more than 50 back catalog games from Square Enix. The acquisition includes 1,100 employees across 3 studios and 8 global locations. The total purchase price amounts to $300 million on a cash and debt-free basis to be paid in full at closing. Embracer has secured additional long-term debt funding commitments for this and other transactions in the pipeline. $300 million for all of this is kind of a steal, and we'll get to that in a bit. Scrolling further down, we have a statement from Phil Rogers, Square Enix America and Europe CEO, who celebrated with the following statement: "It is the perfect fit for our ambitions. Make high-quality games with great people sustainably and grow our existing franchises to their best versions ever. Embracer allows us to forge new partnerships across all media to maximize our franchise's potential and live our dreams of making extraordinary entertainment." We then have a section titled Background and Rationale, where Embracer explains why they decided to make this $300 million acquisition. Here's their justification. Embracer has been particularly impressed by the studio's rich portfolio of original IP, housing brands with proven global potential such as Tomb Raider and Deus Ex, as well as demonstrating the ability to create AAA games with large and growing fan bases. There are compelling opportunities to organically grow the studios to maximize their commercial opportunities. And then they talk about some of the numbers surrounding Tomb Raider and Deus Ex, which actually performed relatively well. They didn't sell gangbusters on a level that matches Grand Theft Auto 5 and Grand Theft Auto Online or anything like that, but, they still did fairly well. Tomb Raider sold 88 million units total, respectively. The Tomb Raider series in its history has sold a total of 88 million units, and Deus Ex, I believe referring to the latest 2 titles, Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, sold 12 million combined. According to this report by Tweaktown, when it comes to the latest Tomb Raider trilogy, that sold 38 million units, and then the Deus Ex duology sold 12 million units. So of the 88 million units that Tomb Raider sold in its entire history, 38 million of that. Now, one reason that many gamers might celebrate this situation is the fact that certain IPs that have remained dormant because Square Enix just wouldn't touch them now have a chance to make a resurgence, like Legacy of Kain, and Embracer makes a comment where they specifically mention this IP, stating that Embracer sees an opportunity to invest in these franchises as well as the additional acquired IPs such as Legacy of Kain, Thief, and other original franchises, which have so much potential but have been left to collect dust by the likes of Square Enix. Maybe Embracer can finally free them and allow them to spread their wings. That would be ideal, and if that's the ultimate result of this acquisition, then it's certainly cause for celebration, if you ask me. Embracer then proceeds to provide a synopsis of the studios they've acquired and what they're currently working on. Crystal Dynamics is actively working on several AAA projects, including the next mainline Tomb Raider game that's being developed on Unreal Engine 5 that will deliver next-generation storytelling and gameplay experiences. Next up, we got Eidos Montreal, who have released games like Thief 4, Deus Ex Human Revolution, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and currently, apparently, the studio is working on a host of AAA projects, including both new releases from beloved franchises and original IP. People are keeping their fingers crossed that either they're working on a new Thief game or they're working on a brand new Deus Ex game, both of which I think would be most welcome. Last but not least, we got Square Enix Montreal. Their focus is mobile games from existing AAA IPs like Hitman, Tomb Raider, and Deus Ex, and the studio will continue to develop and operate memorable mobile games based on AAA IP. So that acquisition is not the most exciting one for me personally, who doesn't partake in mobile games all that much because 99% of that landscape is garbage. With all said and done, once this acquisition goes through, Embracer will have more than 14,000 employees, 10,000 engaged game developers, and 124 internal studios. Embracer's upcoming content pipeline includes more than 230 games, with more than 30 AAA games. Embracer is not a name that's widely spoken about or that's widely known, but behind the scenes, they're a major player, and under their umbrella are a host of well-known studios. I'll talk about that in a bit, but one last thing I'd like to highlight about this press release is Embracer's commitment to single-player experiences. They say Embracer believes there will be an increasingly strong demand for high-quality content, including AAA single-player games, over the decade. Our approach is that quality comes first in games development, which is why we believe our decentralized operating model of empowering management teams while facilitating synergies positions Embracer for sustainable long-term success. Now, it's one thing to say that, it's another thing to execute, but I do like where their mindset is at. Assuming they do live up to what they're saying here, it could mean great things for IPs that Square Enix just hasn't allowed to fully spread its wings, that they've stifled either by allowing them to collect dust or by enforcing monetization or business elements that have gotten in the way, or by having exceedingly short-sighted or unreasonable expectations when it comes to how many units these games need to sell to be considered successful. Square Enix just hasn't had a good track record when it comes to how they deal with these Western studios and how they treat these IPs and projects. So maybe Embracer will be able to do a much better job at helping these projects realize the potential that they hold. Now, on Square Enix's end, the bad news is that the reason they sold these IPs was for an investment in an area that gamers are not particularly enthusiastic about. So this is the statement that Square Enix put out there. Square Enix Holdings enters into an agreement with Embracer Group for the acquisition of Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, Square Enix Montreal, and IP. Clicking on the link will take you to the full statement, which looks something like this. And the one section that I want to highlight is this one right here, purpose of the transaction. This is where things get disconcerting for the future of Square Enix. The transaction will assist the company in adapting to the changes underway in the global business environment by establishing a more efficient allocation of resources, which will enhance corporate value by accelerating growth in the company's core businesses in the digital entertainment domain. In addition, the transaction enables the launch of new businesses by moving forward with investments in fields including blockchain, aka NFTs. Recall that in their New Year letter, Square Enix talked about how the metaverse garnered so much attention that 2021 was dubbed the metaverse year. The metaverse will likely see a meaningful transition to a business phase in 2022. We're almost halfway through 2022 and have yet to see any kind of major development on that front. Another term that gained quick currency in 2021 was NFT, or non-fungible token. I see 2021 not only as a metaverse year one, but also as NFTs year one, given that it was a year in which NFTs were met with a great deal of enthusiasm by a rapidly expanding user base. The vast majority of gamers have been pushing back against this stuff. It's just that Square Enix is deciding to selectively listen to the feedback of NFT bros who want this crap normalized to exploit. Enthusiasm is the last word I'd use to describe the current mood surrounding NFTs, especially in the gaming landscape. The medium-term business strategy that we unveiled in May 2020 identified AI, the cloud, and blockchain games as new domains on which we should focus our investments. I see the play-to-earn concept that has people so excited as a prime example of this. Now, I realize that some people who play to have fun, as if that were some extraneous idea that is an optional thing for video games, and who currently form the majority of players, have voiced their reservations towards these new trends. I love how they underplay the outright dissent against NFTs by labeling them as reservations. I believe that there will be a certain number of people whose motivations is to play to contribute. Traditional gaming has offered no explicit incentive to this latter group of people who were motivated strictly by such inconsistent personal feelings as goodwill and volunteer spirit. The way they dismiss the idea of goodwill and volunteer spirit, or playing games to have fun for that matter, goes to highlight where their mindset's at, and what a good thing it is that franchises like Tomb Raider, Legacy of Kain, Deus Ex, you name it, are out of their control. And then in the next paragraph, it is highlighted that the transaction will also provide an opportunity to better align our overseas publishing function with our organization in Tokyo, so on and so forth. And then in this last paragraph, they highlight a few Western IPs that they do plan to maintain and that they do see sticking around for Square Enix. Going forward, the company's development function will comprise its studios in Japan, Square Enix External Studios, and Square Enix Collective. The company's overseas studios will continue to publish franchises such as Just Cause, Outriders, and Life is Strange. So those are 3 Western IPs that they're deciding to hold on to make more games out of, but everything else they've kind of decided to sell off to Embracer. Now, for those who don't know who Embracer is, it's a Sweden-based company that owns publishing and development studios Gearbox Software, THQ Nordic, Saber Interactive, Koch Media, Deep Silver, and Coffee Stain Studios. A number of these are pretty well known. And they also own comic book publisher Dark Horse and tabletop game publisher Asmodee. So yeah, suffice to say that this conglomerate is no slouch in the gaming landscape. And with the acquisition of some of these iconic IPs, their name recognition is bound to grow. And the hope is that beyond their name recognition, they will also grow the endeavor surrounding some of these beloved IPs and release some successful games and some compelling products surrounding them. This Polygon article also notes some of the recent projects that some of these recently acquired studios have worked on. Eidos Montreal, for example, most recently released Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, which unfortunately did not sell particularly well. It didn't meet certain financial expectations. And Crystal Dynamics most recently released Marvel's Avengers. I don't have to tell you about the utter disaster that live service release was. And currently, it's a live service that's basically on life support, barely alive, and one that I don't foresee being alive for that much longer. Now, it was noted that none of those properties were mentioned in Embracer's announcement of the sale, which means it's hard to say whether there's going to be a Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy sequel and whether Eidos Montreal would helm that. As for Marvel's Avengers, that's a dead IP as far as I'm concerned. But Marvel or no Marvel, it doesn't change the fact that under the umbrella of these recently acquired studios, there are a number of renowned IPs that many are now keeping their fingers crossed that will see a good revivification. Now, what's raising a lot of eyebrows about this is how cheap Square Enix sold all of these studios and IPs for $300 million. For comparison, Embracer spent $1.3 billion just on acquiring Gearbox. And then in this Eurogamer article, it is mentioned how Sony bought Bungie and its Destiny franchise for $3.6 billion. Now, to be fair, franchises like Borderlands and Destiny have been performing a lot better than Deus Ex and Tomb Raider and whatnot. But these acquired IPs are ones with name recognition, with potential to go on to sell millions and millions of copies and generate the kind of revenue that highly successful AAA releases do. So not even $1 billion for the totality of these acquisitions, a mere $300 million in this corporate landscape just seems incredibly cheap. But hey, Embracer no doubt will come out feeling good about this deal. There are already plenty of analysis out there as to why Square Enix might have kind of rushed to sell these IPs and studios off and why they might have decided to sell it on the cheap. Daniel Ahmad tweeted the following: "The short of it, Square Enix Western studios have underperformed over numerous titles. Its biggest growth areas in the past year have been from Japanese studios, smartphones, and MMO. Square Enix was looking to offload Western studios for a while, Embracer's paying the full amount upon completion." So yeah, Square Enix, instead of trying to improve where they went wrong with these studios and these IPs, they're deciding, let's just get rid of this crap so we can focus on the areas where we are very profitable, mobile games, Final Fantasy XIV, and whatnot, and are deciding to stick to that and remove eggs from the Western Studios basket and put them in these other areas alongside their NFT and metaverse endeavors that they're planning to fully lean into, which gives everyone all kinds of bad feelings. Daniel Ahmad continues, "It is worth noting that these expectations are always backed by something tangible, and in Square Enix's case, it's the costs associated with running the studio plus developing the game. In layman's terms, they spent too much and got a low return." It's important to keep in mind that more important than raw numbers in terms of how many units did a game sell, more important than that is what companies are expecting to sell and whether the profit margins are large enough that they consider a project, a release, a product launch to be a success. If a game sells 10 million units, but that still doesn't meet the expectation of, 15 million units and a certain amount of revenue that they were supposed to generate to make up for the losses and the amount of money spent on the project, then a company will say that a product performed disappointingly, even when these large numbers seem to suggest that the game overall was a success. To close off, Daniel Ahmad provides additional stats. For reference, Crystal Dynamics had a profit margin of 3.6% in 2021, while Eidos Montreal had a profit margin of just 0.65% in 2021. Square Enix as a whole had an operating income margin of 14.2% last year, which certainly paints a clear picture of why Square Enix might not have been enthusiastic about keeping these Western studios and IPs around. Here's another analysis from Jeff Grubb, who released the following article on VentureBeat. Square Enix didn't know how to squeeze profits out of its Western studios. Scrolling down, you'll find his take on all of this. The bottom line reasoning for this move is profitability. Square Enix has spent a lot of money on these studios, but it hasn't figured out how to make income from that investment. And then in a section titled Square Enix clearly ran out of ideas, Jeff Grubb highlights how even the Marvel branded products weren't all that successful, and in the case of Marvel's Avengers was a pretty major failure. Disney's major Marvel brand, the cost of that license almost certainly contributed to the low profitability of the studios. You get the sense that Square Enix is saying if Marvel couldn't make these studios profitable, nothing can. See, the folly of that belief is the assumption that just slapping the Marvel name on something will guarantee its success, but even a popular IP needs to release a good product for that product to sell well, for people to spread positive word of mouth, for this thing to go viral to the point where people find buying it irresistible. It's not the Marvel IP's responsibility to make a game successful. That's up to publisher and managerial decisions that lead to a positive development environment that allows that game to shine the brightest, to achieve its fullest potential. But instead, Square Enix decided to shove live service elements into Marvel's Avengers. And then when it comes to Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, that's a game that I thought was very poorly marketed, but I do think a Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy 2 could potentially be Game of the Year material because the presentation, the storytelling, the characters, all that stuff, they absolutely nailed, and there's so much potential there. Hopefully Embracer will see the potential in Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy 2, but when it comes to Marvel's Avengers, that's far gone, and I don't think we should touch that IP for a while until a studio is prepared to deliver an experience that isn't some cash grab live service, but rather something that feels appropriately developed. But in the meantime, what we do know for sure is that Crystal Dynamics is indeed still developing their new Tomb Raider game developed on Unreal Engine 5. Crystal Dynamics will also be working with the initiative to co-develop Microsoft's Perfect Dark reboot, which seems pretty exciting. But other than that, we don't know much about upcoming projects and what Embracer has planned in terms of projects they want to greenlight and IPs they want to revive. There is no way that Embracer doesn't know the desire in the gaming landscape to see Legacy of Kain see a proper revival, so hopefully that's something they'll get to in the not so distant future, but only time will tell. In the meantime, though, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on Square Enix selling off all of these studios and IPs and Embracer acquiring them. I think it's good news for some of these studios and IPs to have a new home, one that seems to, at least based on their statement, care more about these IPs realizing their full potential. But it's bad news for the future of Square Enix, who seem to be getting rid of some of their best stuff and leaning more into scummy business endeavors, monetization-driven business endeavors like NFTs and metaverse and all this other crap that really gives everyone a bad feeling. But that's my take. Share yours in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.